My name is Jack, and I am not here by choice. That's not entirely true. I suppose every step that led me to this fluorescent lit box in the heart of the Wyoming wilderness was a choice. But they were the kind of choices you make when all the good ones have been taken off the table. Before this, my world was a different kind of quiet, a different kind of lonely. It was the sterile silence of a hospital room, punctuated by the rhythmic, indifferent beep of a machine that was supposed to be measuring life, but felt more like it was counting down to the end of it. For 2 years, I lived in that world alongside my wife, Sarah. I learned the language of hushed doctor consultations, of sympathetic but useless glances from nurses, of pharmaceutical names I could never properly pronounce, but whose side effects I knew by heart. I learned the particular weight of a single sheet of paper with the word ice printed at the top. When she was gone, the silence changed. It was no longer sterile, it was cavernous. The beeping stopped, but the invoices didn't. They kept coming. A relentless paper tide, threatening to drown what little was left of me. I sold the house we had bought with such naive optimism. I sold the car. I worked 2 jobs, my days a blur of stocking shelves and bussing tables. My nights spent staring at a ceiling that seemed to press down on me, the numbers scrolling behind my eyes like a stock ticker for my own ruin. The debt was a monster of a different sort than the ones you read about in stories. It didn't have fangs or claws. It had interest rates. It had late fees. It had a voice on the other end of the phone that was always polite, always understanding, and utterly implacable. It was a slow, grinding horror that chewed away. That future there was nothing left but a past you couldn't afford, and a present you couldn't bear. So when I saw the ad, it felt less like an opportunity and more like an escape hatch. Night attendant wanted. Remote gas station. Yellowstone area. High compensation for suitable candidate. Isolation required. The pay was absurd. More than I could make in 6 months of my double shift life. The isolation, which would have been a deal breaker for anyone with a life to leave, was the main selling point for me. I wanted to be somewhere the mail couldn't find me, where the phone calls couldn't reach, where the silence was made of trees and stars, not memories and regret. The interview was a brief, impersonal video call with a man from a company I'd never heard of, Yellowstone Perimeter Holdings. He had a flat, emotionless voice and asked no questions about my past. He only cared if I could handle being alone, if I had a clean record, and if I could start immediately. He gave me a sanitized brochure version of the park's history. All majestic geysers and noble bison, never once touching on the deeper, stranger history that seemed to hum just beneath the surface of the land. I said yes to everything. What else could I do? It was this or let the monster win. The gas station is an island, a tiny, rectangular raft of artificial light, adrift in an ocean of primeval darkness. They call it Grant Station, though it's miles from Grant Village, set on a lonely stretch of road that connects two of the park's less traveled arteries. During the day, I'm told, It sees a trickle of tourists and the occasional park ranger. But at night, the world shrinks to the 20-yard halo cast by the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. Beyond that halo, there is nothing but the impenetrable black wall of the lodgepole pines and a sky so choked with stars, it feels ancient and heavy, like it might collapse. The air itself is different here. It's thin and sharp and carries a complex perfume of pine, damp earth, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible tang of sulfur, a constant reminder that the ground beneath my feet is not solid, settled earth. It is a thin crust over a boiling, violent heart. Early explorers called this place Coulter's Hell, and standing here in the dead of night, you understand why. The silence is the most unsettling part. It's not an absence of sound, it's a presence. It's so profound that every tiny noise, the hum of the coolers, the drip of a faucet, the frantic beat of my own heart, feels like a sacrilege. Sometimes the silence is broken by a sound from the deep woods. A branch snapping, a cry that could be an animal or could be something else entirely. My predecessor, a man named Dale, had left in a hurry. His few belongings were gone, but he'd left the place clean, stocked, and orderly. For the first few hours of my first shift, I busied myself with the mundane, checking inventory, wiping down counters, learning the temperamental old cash register. It was a relief to have simple, physical tasks to ground me. I was trying to convince myself that this was just a job. A weird, isolated, ridiculously well-paying job, but a job nonetheless. It was around 1 a.m. when I found it. I was looking for a roll of paper towels under the main counter, my hand brushing against something taped to the underside of the particle board. I pulled it free. It was a single sheet of paper, laminated and yellowed with age, the text printed from an old dot matrix printer. Taped to it was a handwritten note on a separate, fresher piece of paper. Dale's handwriting was a frantic, spidery scrawl. Jack. It read, my name. The man from the holding company must have told him. This isn't a joke. Your life isn't worth the paycheck if you don't follow these. I'm sorry. I really am. God help you. My first reaction was a tired, cynical smile. An elaborate prank for the new guy. A classic bit of workplace hazing to break the monotony of a dead-end job. I'd seen it before. But as I read the laminated sheet, the smile faded from my face. The specificity of it, the sheer, unhinged strangeness, sent a cold trickle of unease down my spine. This is what it said: Ra les far, trchit chefetish ray and stat ion 1. The coffee must always be fresh between 200 a.m. and 400 a.m. Never let the pot run dry. You are not making it for customers. 2. If a vintage pickup truck with no headlights pulls in, serve the driver. Do not look him in the eyes. Do not accept his payment. He will pay with something else. His dogs in the back are not dogs. Do not look at them for more than a second. 3. The sound from the lake is just the wind. Do not investigate it. Do not try to record it. It doesn't like being noticed. 4. After a storm, check the roof. If you find a single, large black feather, burn it before sunrise. Do not touch it with your bare hands. 5. Do not harm the ravens. They are the watchers. They will sometimes leave you, Gifts. On the doorstep sell rocks, bottle caps. Acknowledge the gift by nodding at them. They are testing you. 6. If a child comes to the door alone after midnight, asking for their mother, do not let them in. They are not lost. Lock the door and ignore the crying. It will stop eventually. The crying is the worst part. 7. Never ever say your full name out loud. 8. If you see a woman in a white dress by the edge of the woods, turn up the lights and play music. Loudly. She is a distraction. The real threat comes from the opposite direction. I read the list 3 times. My pragmatic, grief-hardened mind tried to deconstruct it, to find the logic of the prank. The coffee rule was simple enough. A way to make the new guy waste time and supplies. The truck, the feather, the woman in white. All classic ghost story tropes, probably borrowed from local legends. The rule about the ravens was just bizarre. The one about the child was genuinely creepy, designed to prey on basic human empathy. And the one about my name, that was pure superstition. I should have laughed. I should have crumpled it up and thrown it in the trash. But I didn't. I stood there in the humming silence of the gas station, a tiny island of light, in an endless sea of darkness, and I felt a fear that was colder and deeper than anything I had ever known. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear that the rational, explainable world I had always clung to was just a thin veneer over something else entirely. I looked at the fresh pot of coffee I had made an hour ago, now half empty. It was 1:15 a.m. With a sigh that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room, I dumped out the old coffee, rinsed the pot, and started brewing a new one. Just in case, it was probably a joke, a stupid, elaborate prank. But as I stood there, watching the dark liquid drip into the clean glass pot, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life, the one I had fought so hard to escape, had just been traded for another kind of prison. And this one had rules I didn't understand, and consequences I couldn't possibly imagine. The modern world, with its sterile hospitals and calculated debts, felt a million miles away. It felt like an intrusion here, a wound on this ancient land. And I was beginning to suspect that the things listed on that paper were not monsters. They were the immune response. The first pot of coffee, brewed according to the rule, sat on the burner, its dark surface reflecting the sterile lights above. The rich, bitter smell filled the small space. A scent that should have been comforting but now felt like an offering to something unseen. The hours between 200 a.m. and 400 a.m. crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind that rattled the large plate glass window sent a jolt through my system. I sat on the stool behind the counter. The laminated list of rules laid out before me like a holy text, my eyes scanning the words until they blurred together. My mind, desperate for a foothold in logic, kept trying to pick it apart. It was a prank. It had to be. Dale, the guy before me, probably sat in this very spot, bored out of his skull, and cooked up the most ridiculous list he could imagine to spook the new hire. The part about the ravens. Classic folklore stuff. The woman in white. A ghost story trope as old as time. The child, a cruel psychological jab. But Dale's handwritten note felt different. The desperation in the scrawled words, "God help you," felt chillingly authentic. The station had an old desktop computer in the back office with a dial-up connection that was only slightly faster than a glacier. During the dead hours of the night, I found myself typing Yellowstone strange events and Grant Village legends into the search bar, waiting minutes for each page to load. The results were a mix of tourist, ghost stories, mostly debunked tales of headless brides at the Old Faithful Inn, and articles about the park's bizarre geology. I read about lake music, a mysterious humming sound reported over Yellowstone Lake for over a century, a phenomenon that scientists still couldn't explain. I read about early explorers, accounts of the land, how they called it Coulter's Hell, a place of boiling rivers and sulfurous pits. I even found obscure references to Native American beliefs, not the sanitized versions from the park brochures, but older, darker ones. One account from an 1880s explorer mentioned a legend that the tribes kept the location of the geyser basins secret from white men, lest he should enter that region and form a league with the devils, and by their aid come forth and destroy all Indians. The words sent a shiver through me. It felt less like history and more like a warning. The 4:00 a.m. deadline passed without incident. No headlight, less trucks, no spectral women. Just the oppressive silence and the untouched pot of coffee. As the first hint of gray light began to soften the hard edge of the night, a profound exhaustion washed over me. I had survived my first night. I locked the doors, turned off the main lights, and stumbled to the small, attached apartment that came with the job. It was little more than a cot, a hot plate, and a bathroom. But it was a place to close my eyes. Sleep, however, was a shallow, restless thing, filled with dreams of crying children I couldn't reach and dark birds watching me from the branches of skeletal trees. I was woken in the late afternoon by a sharp tapping sound, not on the door of my apartment, but on the main store window. I pulled on my jeans and went out, my heart thudding. Standing on the concrete apron of the gas pumps were 3 of the largest ravens I had ever seen. They were enormous, glossy black creatures with eyes that seemed too intelligent, too aware. One of them hopped forward and tapped its thick beak against the glass again, a sharp, deliberate sound. My mind immediately went to the list. Rule 5. Do not harm the ravens. They are the watchers. They will sometimes leave you gifts. On the doorsteps, Cirocs bottle caps. Acknowledge the gift by nodding at them. They are testing you. My eyes scanned the area in front of the door. There, placed neatly on the doormat, was a small, flat, gray stone worn smooth by water. It looked utterly ordinary, yet its placement was anything but. It was a gift. I felt a wave of absurdity wash over me. I was seriously contemplating nodding to a bunch of birds because of a crazy list I found under a counter. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to ignore them, to shoo them away, to get on with the business of opening up for the day. Shift change that never came. I was the only employee, but the memory of the oppressive fear from the night before, the weight of the wilderness pressing in, was stronger. Dale's warning echoed in my head. This isn't a joke. Taking a deep breath, I slowly unlocked the door and pushed it open a crack. The three ravens watched me, their heads cocked. I looked down at the stone, then back at the lead raven. I gave a short, deliberate nod. For a moment, nothing happened. The birds just stared. Then, the lead raven let out a series of low, guttural croaks. It wasn't the normal caw of a crow or raven. It sounded deeper, more complex, like a language I couldn't understand. Then, as one, the three of them spread their massive wings and launched into the air, circling once above the gas station before heading back towards the dense forest. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the spot where they had been. The air felt charged, different. The stone on the mat was no longer just a rock. It was proof. Proof that at least one of the rules was real. And if one was real, then they all could be. The fear I'd felt last night returned, but it was different now. It was no longer a vague, creeping dread of the unknown. It was a sharp, specific terror of the known. Ow, ow, oh, ow, oh, go, oh, ow, 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 ow. The second night was worse than the first. The comforting blanket of skepticism was gone, leaving me raw and exposed. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every sound seemed to have intent. I brewed the coffee at 200 a.m. on the dot, my hands shaking slightly. I kept the lights turned up to their maximum brightness, the glare hurting my eyes, but providing a fragile sense of security. I tried to read a paperback I'd brought, but the words just swam on the page. My attention was fixed on the wall of darkness outside the windows. It was just after midnight when I heard it. A soft, hesitant tapping on the glass of the front door. My blood ran cold. I slowly raised my head from behind the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing outside, her small form, illuminated by the harsh, fluorescent lights, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with blonde pigtails and wearing a thin, pink nightgown, completely inadequate for the cold Wyoming night. Her face was pale and tear-streaked. Rule Face 6. If a child comes to the door alone after midnight, asking for their mother, do not let them in. They are not lost. Lock the door and ignore the crying. It will stop eventually. The crying is the worst part. Please. Her small voice was muffled by the glass, but I could hear the desperation in it. Please, mister. I can't find my mommy. Every instinct, every fiber of my being, screamed at me to throw the door open and bring her inside. She was just a child, lost, cold, and terrified in the middle of a national park, known for its predators and harsh conditions. This couldn't be one of them. This was real, a real emergency. The rules were for strange, supernatural things, not for a lost little girl. I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. Where are your parents? I asked, my voice strained. Did you wander away from a campsite? We were camping. She sobbed, pressing her small hands against the glass. I had a bad dream and I went for a walk, and now I can't find our tent. Please, it's so cold. My resolve crumbled. This was insane. I couldn't leave a child out there to freeze or be attacked by an animal. Dale had to be wrong about this one. Or maybe this was the test. Maybe the real test was to show compassion. I reached for the lock. My fingers brushed against the cold metal, and a jolt, like static electricity, shot up my arm. I froze. Dale's words again. The crying is the worst part. Why would he write that? What could be worse than the crying of a lost child? I looked at her again, forcing myself to see past the tears and the pink nightgown. Her eyes, wide and blue, were fixed on mine. There was something in them. An emptiness. A stillness that didn't belong in a frightened child's face. And her nightgown, it was perfectly clean. Not a speck of dirt, not a single pine needle, as if she had just materialized on the concrete instead of walking through the woods. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. I backed away from the door. "I can't open the door." The change was instantaneous and horrifying. The pleading look on her face vanished, replaced by a cold, hard fury. The tears stopped. Her voice, when she spoke again, was no longer the high-pitched plea of a child. It was flat, cold, and ancient. "Let me in." I stumbled backward, my heart seizing in my chest. "No," I managed to choke out. Then the crying started again. But it wasn't the sad, desperate sobbing from before. It was a sound of pure, manufactured misery, designed to claw at the deepest parts of your soul. It was a sound of agony, of pain so profound it felt like it could shatter the glass between us. It vibrated through the floor, through the soles of my feet. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was inside my head. It was the sound of every regret I'd ever had, the sound of Sarah's last breath, the sound of my own failure. I scrambled into the back office and slammed the door, pressing my back against it, as if I could physically hold the sound at bay. The crying intensified, morphing into a high-pitched shriek of rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It was a sound that didn't belong to any human throat, child or adult. It was the sound of something that hated, something that had been denied its prey. I don't know how long I stayed there, huddled on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. It could have been minutes or an hour. But then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that rushed back in was more terrifying than the noise had been. It was a dead, empty silence. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to my feet and crept back into the main store. I peered through the window. She was gone. There was no sign of her. No footprints on the damp concrete, nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. I stood there, bathed in the cold, artificial light of my island, staring out into the absolute, unforgiving darkness of the Yellowstone night. The prank was over. The last of my denial was dead and buried. The rules were not a guide. They were the only thing keeping me alive. And I had a long, long night ahead of me. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a battlefield. In the handful of hours, I managed to steal between the end of my shift and the relentless afternoon sun. My mind replayed the encounter with the girl. I'd see her tear, streaked face morph into that mask of cold fury. Hear that impossible, soul scraping shriek echoing in the hollows of my skull. I'd wake up gasping, my heart trying to batter its way out of my chest, the thin mattress of my cot, soaked in sweat. The fear was a physical presence now, a constant companion. It sat with me while I ate my canned soup. It showered with me. It stared back at me from the mirror with my own hollowed-out eyes. The gas station, my supposed sanctuary from the debts and grief of my old life, had become a cage. A brightly lit, well-stocked cage surrounded by a darkness that was patient, hungry, and ancient. The list of rules was no longer a curiosity or a prank. It was my scripture. I read it 12 times a day, the laminated paper growing soft and worn at the edges from my constant handling. Each rule was a commandment, and the penalty for breaking it was not damnation in some distant afterlife, but immediate, unimaginable horror. My life had shrunk to a series of rituals: brewing the coffee at 2 a.m., keeping the lights bright, scanning the tree line for a woman in white, flinching at every sound from the direction of the lake. The ravens became a strange, unsettling fixture. They would appear most afternoons, 3 of them, landing silently on the asphalt. They never made a sound, just watched me with their intelligent, obsidian eyes. I would nod to them through the glass, and they would dip their heads in return before taking flight. They continued to leave their gifts. A few days after the incident with the child, I found a tarnished silver button on the mat, the kind from an old military uniform. Another time, it was a shard of obsidian, sharpened to a razor edge on one side. I never touched them, just acknowledged them with my nod. I didn't know if they were guardians, messengers, or simply observers, but their presence felt like a part of the new, terrifying ecosystem I was trapped in. They were a reminder that I was being watched always. About a week after my encounter with the not child, the sky began to change. The vast, clear blue of a Wyoming afternoon curdled into a bruised, greenish gray. The air grew heavy and still, charged with a palpable electricity. Clouds bowled over the distant peaks of the Absaroka Range. A dark army marching towards my lonely outpost. The storm broke with a sudden, shocking violence. Rain came down not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets that hammered against the windows like fists. Thunder wasn't a distant rumble. It was a physical concussion that shook the building to its foundations, making the cans on the shelves rattle. The lights flickered, died, then came back on with a hum that sounded strained and fearful. I spent the storm huddled in the back office, the list of rules clutched in my hand. My eyes fixed on Rule Y4I. After a storm, check the roof. If you find a single, large black feather, burn it before sunrise. Do not touch it with your bare hands. The storm raged for hours, a primal tantrum of nature. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it passed. The rain stopped. The thunder retreated, grumbling, into the east. A strange, watery moonlight filtered through the clouds, bathing the drenched landscape in a sickly, silver light. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the dripping of water from the eaves. The rest of the night was agonizingly quiet. No customers, no strange visitors. Just me, the clock, and the dread of what the sunrise would bring. It was around 3:30 a.m. when it appeared. There was no sound of an engine, no crunch of tires on the wet gravel. One moment, The rain-slicked apron in front of the pumps was empty. The next, a truck was there, sitting silently under the buzzing lights, as if it condensed out of the shadows themselves. It was a vintage pickup, a model from the 50s or 60s, its body a patchwork of rust and faded black paint. Its headlights were dark, hollow sockets. Rule Fe 2. If a vintage pickup truck with no headlights pulls in, serve the driver. Do not look him in the eyes. Do not accept his payment. He will pay with something else. His dogs in the back are not dogs. Do not look at them for more than a second. My breath hitched. My hands, slick with sweat, gripped the edge of the counter. The driver's side door creaked open, and a figure emerged. He was tall and gaunt, wrapped in a long, dark duster coat despite the mild night. A wide, brimmed hat shadowed his face, concealing everything from the nose up. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his boots making no sound on the wet pavement as he walked towards the door. The bell above the door didn't jingle when he entered. The air grew cold, and a smell filled the station. Damp earth, decay, and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet, like old blood. "Fill her up," he said. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "And a carton of Camels." I nodded, my eyes fixed on the scuffed toe of his boot. "Yes, sir," I mumbled, my own voice sounding foreign and thin. I grabbed the gas pump key and moved towards the door, forcing myself to walk slowly, not to run. My entire body screamed at me to look up, to see his face. But Dale's warning and the memory of the little girl's shriek kept my gaze locked on the ground. Outside, the air was thick with his presence. As I walked towards the truck, I risked a glance at the truck bed. Huddled in the back, against the cab, were two shapes. In the gloom, they looked like large, emaciated dogs. But then one of them lifted its head, and the moonlight caught its eyes. They glowed with a faint, sickly yellow light. They weren't dogs. Their bodies were lean and wolf-like, but their backs sloped downwards sharply, like hyenas. Their fur was patchy and black, and their muzzles were too long, filled with too many teeth. They watched me with a terrifying, hungry intelligence. Shunkawarak. And the name surfaced from some forgotten corner of my late night research. A creature from local tribal lore said to steal dogs. I snapped my eyes away, my heart hammering. Do not look at them for more than a second. My hands trembled as I unscrewed the gas cap and inserted the nozzle. The pump clicked and whirred, the numbers on the display spinning. It felt like the most normal sound in the world, and the most insane. When the tank was full, I replaced the nozzle and cap, my movements stiff and robotic. Back inside, the man was waiting at the counter, his back to me, examining a rack of potato chips. I retrieved a carton of Camels from behind the counter and placed it beside the register. He turned, and I quickly looked down at the countertop, my gaze landing on his hands as he reached for the cigarettes. They were long and pale, with dirt caked under the fingernails. Not normal dirt, but a dark, rich soil that looked like it had been scraped from the bottom of a grave. He ignored the cigarettes. Instead, he reached into his duster and placed a heavy object on the counter. It was an old, ornate silver pocket watch. It was tarnished and dented, the glass face cracked. The hands were frozen at 3003. He pushed it towards me. "Keep it," he whispered. I didn't move. Do not accept his payment. But he wasn't offering it as payment. He was giving it to me, or leaving it with me. I didn't know which was worse. He turned and walked out of the station. The bell, again, remained silent. I waited, my body rigid, until I saw the truck pull away, still without a sound, and dissolve back into the impenetrable darkness from which it had come. I was alone again with the watch. It sat on the counter, radiating a palpable cold. I had the overwhelming urge to throw it into the woods, to smash it with a hammer. But I also knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was now my responsibility. I picked it up using a paper towel and dropped it into the cash drawer, burying it beneath the coin tray. The rest of the night was a blur of terror and exhaustion when the first gray fingers of dawn began to probe the sky. A new wave of dread washed over me. The store there, with leaden limbs. I retrieved the old wooden stepladder from the storeroom. I carried it outside into the crisp, clean air of the new day. The world looked freshly washed, innocent. It was. I propped the ladder against the side of the building and began to climb. My head cleared the edge of the roof. The flat, tarred surface was slick with leftover rainwater, reflecting the nascent colors of the sunrise. And there, in the exact center of the roof, lay a single feather. It was huge, the length of my forearm, and it was a black so deep and absolute it seemed to drink the light around it. It didn't reflect the dawn, it consumed it. It was utterly alien and utterly terrifying. I stared at it, my mind reeling. Another rule proven true. Another impossible task laid before me. I had to get it down. I had to burn it. And I had to do it before the sun, now a brilliant orange sliver on the horizon, rose any higher. The cage was real, and the rules were its bars. The sun was a merciless blade on the horizon, slicing away the protective shroud of night. I was perched precariously on the top rung of the stepladder, my body trembling, not from the morning chill, but from a fear so profound it had become a part of my physiology. On the roof, the black feather lay like a wound on the tarred surface. It was a physical piece of the impossible, a tangible link to the nightmare that now governed my life. Burn it before sunrise. Do not touch it with your bare hands. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. The sun was already cresting the distant mountains. I scrambled down the ladder and burst into the station, my mind racing. I grabbed a pair of long, metal tongs from beside the hot dog roller and a box of matches. Back outside, I climbed the ladder again, my movements clumsy with haste. Leaning over the edge of the roof, I managed to snag the feather with the tongues. It was heavier than it looked, and the barbs felt strangely resistant, as if they were clinging to the roof. With a final, desperate tug, I pulled it free. I practically fell down the ladder and scurried to the gravel patch behind the station, far from the gas pumps. I dropped the feather onto the damp ground. It lay there, absorbing the nascent sunlight, a patch of absolute blackness in the growing dawn. My hands shook as I struck a match. The first one fizzled out. The second caught. I lowered the tiny flame to the feather. It didn't catch fire in the way a normal feather would. There was no gentle curl of smoke, no slow blackening. The moment the flame touched it, the feather erupted in a flash of brilliant, silent, green light. It was gone in an instant, leaving behind no ash, no scorch mark, only the faint, sickeningly sweet smell of ozone and something else, something like burnt sugar and decay. I stood there, panting in the quiet morning, the tongs still clutched in my white, knuckled grip. Another rule followed. Another trial survived. But it wasn't a victory. Each survived encounter felt like I was just sinking deeper into the mire, the rules wrapping around me like chains, dragging me down into this place. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of dread and exhaustion. The mundane world ceased to exist for me. My past life, the grief for Sarah, the crushing weight of the debt. It all seemed like a story that had happened to someone else. In another lifetime. My reality had shrunk size of this gas station, this island of light, and the list of rules that were its constitution. The pocket watch the driver had left sat cold and silent in the cash drawer, a constant, heavy reminder of my transaction with the night. I never looked at it, but I could feel its presence, a small, dense knot of wrongness in the heart of my prison. The ravens continued their silent vigil, their gifts becoming more and more unsettling. One day it was a single, child-sized leather shoe, ancient and stiff. Another, it was a lock of blonde hair tied with a faded pink ribbon. I nodded my acknowledgement each time, my stomach churning. They were not testing me anymore. They were cataloging the station's victims. It was on a clear, moonless night, 2 weeks after the storm, that the final rules came into play. The silence was particularly heavy, the kind that presses in on your eardrums. The sky was a black velvet canvas, choked with a terrifying number of stars. I was wiping down the counter, for the 10th time the simple, repetitive motion of frail defense against the mounting anxiety, when I saw her. Rule Fate 8. If you see a woman in a white dress by the edge of the woods, turn up the lights and play music loudly. She is a distraction. The real threat comes from the opposite direction. She was standing just at the tree line, where the harsh fluorescent light gave way to absolute darkness. A tall, slender figure in a simple, flowing white dress. Her long, dark hair obscured her face. She was perfectly still, a pale statue in the gloom. My heart stopped. It looked like Sarah. From this distance, the build, the hair, the way she held her head. It was an agonizingly perfect echo of my wife. Grief, sharp and sudden, pierced through the layers of fear. A desperate, insane hope flared in my chest. Was this it? Was this some kind of reward? A spirit, a memory, a chance to see her one last time. I took a step towards the door, my hand outstretched, her name a strangled whisper on my lips. Then the rule slammed back into my mind. She is a distraction. With a sob of effort, I tore my eyes away from her. I lunged for the main breaker panel behind the counter, flipping every switch I could find. The main lights hummed brighter. A set of powerful floodlights I didn't even know were functional sputtered to life, bathing the entire gas station apron in a stark, unforgiving glare. Then I scrambled for the old boombox Dale had left on a shelf. I jammed in a dusty cassette tape, AC to DC, and cranked the volume to maximum. The opening chords of Hell's Bells shattered the sacred silence of the wilderness. The music was a violent, profane intrusion, an act of sonic warfare against the night. I risked a glance back at the woods. The woman was still there, but she seemed diminished by the light and noise, her form wavering like a heat haze. The real threat comes from the opposite direction. My blood ran cold. The opposite direction. I spun around, my back to the windows, my eyes scanning the interior of the station. The music was a deafening wall of sound, but beneath it, I heard a new noise. Tick, tock, tock. It was coming from the cash drawer. With trembling hands, I pulled the drawer open. The silver pocket watch was no longer silent. It was ticking, the sound crisp and loud in the small space. The hands, once frozen at 3003, were now moving. I stared, mesmerized, as the second hand swept around the cracked face. It wasn't just telling time. It felt like it was counting down to something. The bell above the door didn't jingle. I didn't even notice him until he spoke. His voice cutting through the roar of the music, as if it wasn't there at all. The debt is paid. I looked up. He was standing on the other side of the counter, where I had been moments before. It was the man from the truck, the man in the dark duster and wide, brimmed hat. But this time, his head was raised. There was no face beneath the brim of his hat. Where a face should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of night sky. The same ancient, heavy, star-choked sky that was outside the window. It was a window into a vast and empty cosmos, and I felt my sanity fraying at the edges as I looked into it. His voice wasn't a whisper now. It was the sound of grinding rock, of wind through dead pines, of the immense, patient pressure of the Earth's core. The old debt, he clarified, the star field of his face churning slowly, the one of paper and numbers. It has been settled. He gestured with a long, pale hand towards the laminated list on the counter. A new line of text had appeared at the bottom, printed in the same dot, matrix font as the others. It looked as if it had always been there. 9. You are the night attendant. The position is now filled. Do not attempt to leave. This is not a job, Jack, the entity said, the sound of his voice vibrating in my bones. It is a post, a balance. This place, he gestured to the vast darkness beyond the lights, is a wound. A place where the skin of the world is thin. The rules are not for your protection. They are sutures. They hold things in place. The attendant is the needle. I finally understood. The absurdly high pay, the isolation, the lack of questions about my past. I wasn't hired. I was chosen. My grief and desperation had made me the perfect candidate. Someone with nothing to lose. Someone already haunted. Someone who would cling to any set of rules to survive. Dale hadn't just left. He had found a replacement. Me, and the pocket watch wasn't payment. It was the contract. My acceptance of it had sealed my fate. What are you? I stammered, my voice barely audible, over Angus Young's guitar solo. The star face seemed to draw my gaze deeper into its cold, infinite void. I am the one who collects. There are many kinds of debt. You have simply traded one for another. He turned and walked towards the door. The music faltered and died as he passed the boombox. The lights flickered and dimmed back to their normal, humming glow. The bell remained silent as he passed through the closed door and vanished. I was alone. The silence that rushed back in was no longer empty. It was full of my future. An endless succession of nights. Brewing coffee. For things that weren't customers, ignoring the cries of children that weren't children. Burning the feathers of things that shouldn't fly. And serving drivers with stars for faces. I walked to the window. The woman in white was gone. The forest was just a wall of black trees again. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but the panic was gone. In its place was a strange, hollow resignation. This was my life now. A life of ritual and vigilance, a warden in a prison of ancient horrors. I walked behind the counter, picked up the laminated list, and read the 9th rule again. You are the night attendant. I folded the paper and tucked it into my shirt pocket. I dumped out the pot of coffee. It was almost 200 a.m. and started brewing a fresh one. The rich, bitter smell filled the small, quiet space. It was the smell of my new, eternal life. The monster of my debt was gone, slain by something far older and far more terrible. And I, Jack, was its payment.